small ones that I'm like.
Okay, because actually one of the things that I was reading about was I guess I didn't think of it as exact logistic, but that there is a logistic methodology for a relatively small n.
Yeah,
Yeah.
easy for exact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Might be able to.
One other part, it was mentioned about tamper-proof. Would you distinguish between tamper-proof, tampering on documents, tampering documents versus breeding documents?
Sure.
You didn't mention breeding in this.
No, I didn't. One of the things I didn't talk about in this discussion was the cycle that's involved in identity fraud. The first step is what I call A, the acquisition of the identity data. The second step is B, the breeding, and that's a process of taking acquired data. I talk about it in the document, but I didn't have a presentation here. But that's the process of breeding. That's where you take the acquired data and you use that to breed, to create a variety of new identity document types based on the acquired data.
So documents can be fraudulent without being tampered.
Yes, so I think I was talking about that a little earlier. You may actually have a document that has not been tampered with, but it is nevertheless, there is a potential for fraud because it has incorrect information on it. Yes. Okay.
So you're in effect talking about the data source for the creation of the document type.
Remember I started off by saying that I am saying that the potential for identity fraud exists if the data on the document does not represent the holder. In other words, the data doesn't accurately represent the person who's presenting it. That's where I started off with my definition of
This is what I was trying to get you to say earlier on about inter-organizational flow.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit in just a minute too, when I talk about where I think this can go for the future.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So 4 minutes to wrap up?
Sure. Okay. Actually, I can wrap it up very quickly because having gone through all of this discussion, it is very easy because
He's only got 40% left. So
this part is fairly standard interpretation of statistical results. I mean, I think we've had a very useful discussion about whether the methodology is appropriate or not, and these are the standard things. My sample gave a chi-squared and an r-squared that suggests that the x's do in fact explain, that these independent variables do in fact explain the probability of identity fraud. And then I give examples of, how you would just interpret the actual numbers that you get. So for instance, if you look at the E-media line, the first line, the coefficient there is 2.28. So the way you interpret that is if the identity type contains electronic media, then the fact that the coefficient is positive, it means that the log of the odds of fraud increases by 2.28, and you interpret that as meaning that the odds of fraud increase by 8.78%, assuming all of the other x's are fixed. And similarly, for
And by the way, you'll want to translate that to probabilities.
yes, correct, correct.
So you don't understand fraud.
Right.
And they're deceptive because if the odds are almost nothing to begin with, but the increase of odds
Doesn't necessarily mean very much, right. So I just use that one as an example and talk here about where I see the future research, and that's actually where I give a brief, an example here of the inter-organizational evidence flow that's involved with identities, because what you have is a case where an organization A may issue, let's say, a passport. And that passport is used by organization B and by organization G. So the evidence is flowing from A to, in this case, B and G. Organization B is going to issue a driver's license, let's say, based on looking at the passport. And that driver's license is going to be used eventually by organization E and F. So now the evidence has flowed has begun flowing through the network. Organization G is looking at the driver's license, and it's also looking at, let's say, the credit cards that are issued in turn by E and F. And based on that, now G issues its own identity document, whatever that might be. And so on. I mean, that's what the arrows are showing, is that an organization issues some kind of identity document, and that identity document is assessed by another organization, and assuming that there's a positive assessment, meaning that they think that there's not a potential for identity fraud, they then issue their own identity document, and so it continues flowing through the network. You get to a point now where you have an organization K, and the question is, and that's really where I see this research can go, is for K, what policy should they have? Not only a policy in terms of which identity document is likely to have the highest credibility, but more importantly, what combination perhaps of identity document types should they look at? In the diagram that I've shown you here, for instance, if K decided it was going to look at documents coming from A, G, and I, all of those documents ultimately are depending on the credibility of the document that was issued by A in the first place. So even though, so without knowing anything about the rest of the network, organization K can set a policy perhaps based on the research that I'm doing, which is the first level. They can set a policy about the different document types that they can look at.